Good evening, all. I'm going to give a minute for people to just trickle in, and you should see a little, just a little poll pop up. If you don't mind just filling in those two questions, and then we'll get started in just about 1 minute here. Okay, I'm going to slowly get the ball rolling here. As I mentioned, you should have seen a little pop up. You can fill that out and then close it out. As questions come up this evening, if you want to just put them in the Q&A, I'll make sure I leave time for that at the end. We're booked for an hour today. I don't imagine it'll take the whole time. But I want to give you guys as much information as possible. And like I said, give some time at the end, just if anyone has questions. My name is Kitron with Applerouth Tutoring Services. I work as a tutor, mostly doing SAT and PSAT and ACT prep with I dabble in a few other topics. And I'm also an executive functioning coach, which I think will inform some of the stuff we talk about today. Our goal today is just as final exam and AP season rapidly approaches, giving students and then also their parents, guardians, support system some tools for just how to boost your functioning and how to set yourself up for the best success on finals. And so some of the topics we're going to talk about: attitude, how to use working memory. We'll talk about what that is. Effective study methods, both throughout the school year and then as finals approach, right? A couple of weeks leading up. Talk about how to improve your memory, so certain tools we can use, and then how to mitigate testing anxiety, which is a big thing for students, both on SAT, ACT, but also in school exams. Throughout, I'll refer to executive functions, but I didn't want to make it too technical because mainly I want people to get actual tips and tools they can use in the coming weeks. But what executive functioning skills are things like prioritization and planning, right? And impulse control, things and thinking about the way that you think. So we all have executive function skills in a spectrum, and people improve their skills as life goes. But there are tools that you can actually get better either with a coach or on your own or both at planning and prioritizing, right? And all those things that will help you then succeed both in school and in life, really. So one big part of that executive functioning, but also just studying and being a good student in general, is being proactive. And again, I think most of the things we talk about today apply to life as well. But good study habits are the result of a proactive attitude, right? Seeing that you've got something coming up in the near future, we've got a challenge, we've got goals, right? And so then we act in order to address those challenges or achieve those goals. We get an assignment, right? And we know it's due in 2 weeks. And so we kind of lay out a plan and start the framework and have days scheduled in where we're going to work on it, rather than, oh crap, it's due tomorrow. And then reactively, we're going to stay up late, procrastinate, right? And then probably do a less good job, but also sacrifice sleep and time on other activities. What does a proactive student do? We know when assignments are due and we plan accordingly, like I just mentioned. If you know, for example, that the last office hours are on Tuesday, but the test is on Friday, right? Don't wait to start studying until after Tuesday, because what if you have questions that you need to address? And you should ask questions both early and often. That's of teachers, of peers, right? Tutors, parents. Make sure you know who to go to ask questions and where to seek help. And we'll talk a bit more about that, because self-advocacy and seeking help is something that we're not very good at generally. A proactive student will not make assumptions about an assignment. We know what they say about assuming. Make sure you understand the exact assignment. That applies even to individual questions on a final exam, right? What am I solving for? Don't just dive in, right? That's why we write a short outline before you start an essay. Instead of cramming, right? Which especially doesn't work for a standardized test, but also for many finals, you're better off gradually studying. And proactive students, therefore, usually get good results, right? Get a good grade, generally have applications, on top of them, and that often results in getting into a great school, right? Success down the road. That's kind of painting with a broad brush, but proactive students tend to have a lot of success in, junior, senior year of high school and beyond. On the other hand, a reactive student, which many of us probably have been at some point in our lives, a reactive student will miss a deadline and then hope for a favor, right? And say, oh crap, I missed it, right? And so as a teacher, that becomes kind of a pattern with that student if you see it a couple times. Rarely asking for help, doing the assignment last minute, making assumptions, all the things we said proactive students shouldn't do. Tries to do their best and hopes the teacher won't grade too hard. That's leaving it in someone else's hands, right? If you know that you could do better, right, or you don't have a full picture of what the teacher wants, then that's on us as a student. Reactive would be cramming, asking to retake, waiting too long to take tests or to worry about college, and then we get fewer offers often, right? Less success down the road. The good news is we already know how to be proactive. So even if you don't consider yourself by nature innately a proactive person, you know how to do it. And we, as parents, you can also help. Think about other activities that you or your child has worked hard at, whether that's gaming or sports or cooking or writing or music. And then what did they do to gradually improve at that? Was it just repetition? Was it lessons? For soccer, was it joining a different team and traveling and meeting new people? How can we apply that similar approach to academics? So maybe there's kind of a study group, or maybe I can bring in some of these tools that I use to focus on sports or music or what have you, and use those to help myself focus on testing and academics. And then a lot of executive functioning is about developing a growth mindset coming from a lens of curiosity. So as a coach, I want to make sure I'm not a guru and telling people, here's how to think, here's what you do. It's more, okay, so let's think about what happened. Can you talk to me about how you felt? And if you were to do this again, what you might do differently, what went wrong, what went well. Not, this went horribly, I'm bad at this, which a lot of students have, right? That fixed mindset of, oh no, I'm failing, versus the growth mindset. Like, that didn't go great, what can I learn from it? Or which parts of this did go well? This will come back also to just positive visualization is a big part of success. And something that I'll say in every session of mine, whether it's SAT, ACT, or executive functioning, is we need to make mistakes. It's a safe place to do that. It is okay to struggle. It is important to struggle. And in fact, it's part of getting better, right? You're not just going to immediately sit down, or at least most of us won't just sit down and know something and do it immediately. We need to have that stumbling block, make a mistake, and then learn from it. Right? So mistakes are good things. Don't get frustrated. And so then this is corny, but we'll talk about GOAT, GOAT, the greatest study plan of all time. Just a framework, a few things that you want to keep in mind as you go into finals. So one is you do want to have goals. That means set specific attainable goals, but make them challenging, right? You don't, if you have an 85, don't just say, I want to get a B, right? Maybe you can get into the A- territory. If you're doing like executive functioning, so a coaching session, I'd have, let's set one safe goal, right? Which is we're going to get all our assignments done this week, and one stretch goal, which is can we get a 90 on our biology exam? But be realistic, right? It's okay to tolerate frustration and fail, but you don't want to make it, so that every goal is barely attainable and you get overwhelmed and overtaxed. Be realistic as you set your goals. And sometimes we have to recalibrate goals, and that's okay too. The O in GOAT is for organization. This is also a huge, huge part of executive functioning skills. Being organized helps you focus. So your physical and your digital setup both need to be clear, right? You don't want to have distractions on your desk or your workspace, but you also need to make sure that when you're on your computer studying, there aren't these like easy paths to go on to, Discord or internet or whatever is gonna distract you. Routines can be very helpful. Create a routine to let your brain know it's time to focus. So anyone who's gotten into a routine with like working out, for example, knows that once you do it, right, you get up in the morning and you do it a few times, it starts to become this kind of more natural routine, becomes easier. Make sure you have the tools you need. We'll talk more about that later. And then everyone should be using a calendar. So many functioning coaches have like these big calendars that they want you to put up on your wall, which I think is a great thing. Making sure also that you have Google Calendar or just something in your phone where you've got everything planned out. The A is for attention, meaning focus your attention on the schoolwork. This is true even as you do assignments throughout the year, but especially as tests approach, finals. Just again, don't let yourself be distracted. Multitasking, like very few of us as people are multitaskers, like less than 1%. So students think, yeah, I can listen to music with lyrics and study. They're usually not right about that. There are a few who can, but most people cannot. And then built-in breaks, right? Don't say like it's a 40-minute break where I'm doing, something that's going to super distract me and get me out of the swing of the studying, but definitely schedule short breaks. Work for an hour at a time, 10-minute break, and we'll talk a little bit more about how exactly to structure that, some ideas for that. And the most important is the T for testing. Not the test itself, but testing yourself in preparation for the exam. Testing comes in the form of writing it down, speaking, right? If there's something you just want to make sure that you have a good knowledge of, that could be into the mirror or to a picture or to a parent or just a pet. But I promise you, if you write it down, you teach someone else, it will stick a million times better than if you just try to memorize it. So how can you encourage yourself or your student to study efficiently? And can we be more proactive in our study plans? So we're going to talk a bit about that. And I mean, just a note on this slide, I think the biggest thing is going to be positive. Focus on the successes, not the mistakes. Easier probably said from the perspective of a tutor or mentor than it is a parent or guardian sometimes. And also at, the 10th, 11th, 12th grade, I remember that a lot of what my parents said, even though they were usually right, fell on deaf ears. And so that's where I think a tutor or coach can help a lot, right? And kind of pass on the right message, but it doesn't come from mom or dad. And then encouraging students to be more proactive. Some do well with the carrot reward system. Others, it's like, if you don't do this, you don't get that, right? So everyone's different. You just kind of think about what's the big motivator for this particular student. The hardest thing in my experience is definitely just removal of phone and other technology distractions. But if you can put that in a different room charging, even that makes a world of difference. Mention memorization, right? A lot of these tests, like a history test, is going to be a lot of memorization, right? And it may be something we remember for the test and then forget, unfortunately. But it's important to just have it in our heads for test day. And that is more than just reading a chapter or completing a worksheet. I think for one, reading your notes would be way more helpful than a chapter in a book, something you've already written down. But then also you want deeper understanding. You want to link ideas to understand what happens behind the scene. And that helps you productively memorize. So like on a math question, maybe we don't need the background of quadratic formula, but if you teach it, that might help someone understand, oh, this is why this part of the quadratic formula works this way, right? And so the same will be true for different parts of classes, right? Why is this unit important? Why do we talk about it? What is the teacher going to maybe test us on? Our brain's a network of connections, and as you study for a certain exam or a class, our goal is we need to link them. We need to build connections across ideas. So how do we do that? One good way is the 24-hour review trick, meaning if you learn something, you should review it within 24 hours, if at all possible. If you do, you most likely will create a stronger memory and you're less likely to forget it. Vocab, history, formulas, pretty much anything, right? Learn it and then give it a day, but then sit again. And I would say even then another week and cement it one more time. Those who saw something and then reviewed it rather than just cramming like one learning session in, retain the information much better in the days and weeks to come. working memory is how much we can keep in our brain at one time. And we're not made to remember everything. People say, you know, oh, I've got a photographic memory, right? But even those people, and I'm learning this now, you know, as I approach my 40s, and my friends who have great memories are now like, wait a second, I feel like you're remembering that incorrectly. Or they don't all of a sudden remember something. This is just natural. We are constantly getting info and it's going to push stuff out. So we see this with tutoring, right? Where it's like, yeah, I remember the advanced algebra, I did that this year, but geometry and trig, no, that was 2 years ago, I've forgotten it. But when we study, we use our working memory. It's the information that we keep right at the tip of our brain. And again, I think the key is understanding we can't overload it. You can only keep a certain amount in. So that's where we have to be strategic and efficient. The way to push something into your working memory and keep it there is forced recall. When we force ourselves, or when we are forced to think about information for a second or third or fourth time, that brings it into our working memory. It's the reason that you have tests and quizzes, right, and assignments. The good news is you can force recall yourself by asking, all right, what did I just read? And then I can't emphasize this enough, writing it down. So as you're studying, maybe there's a unit that you're not sure of or a chapter you're less comfortable with, read it and then write down what you just read, kind of summarize it in your own words. If you don't do that, it's very likely to fade. But then if you write it, that act alone will often just help you remember it. So writing stuff down as you study, probably the most important takeaway. And again, we're trying to link them. So you may not see initially how they connect, but if you link ideas and connect them, they'll stick. If they're not connected, then it's much less likely because they're all these floating ideas and we don't understand how they interact with each other or support one another. So this would be much nicer. We want them to link. And then that will link back to our ability to memorize. Mnemonic devices, I would say most people know what those are, but maybe don't make as good of use as they could. We've all encountered them at some point, like PEMDAS, which is order of operations. So parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. SOHCAHTOA, terrible acronym, but that's for sine, cosine, tangent. M comes before N, which is how I remember how to spell mnemonic, tough word. And there's no such thing as a mnemonic that's too silly or ridiculous or bad. Anything that works for you is a good device. Just a few examples, right? Whether that's rhyme or alliteration, associations and narratives. Decorous is kind of like decorative, or acronyms and acrostics for reading music, for example. Lots of different kinds. So whatever helps you. Sometimes it's about like colors, right? Think about how you learn. If it's visual, then give yourself a visual mnemonic, right? This is something that I think you can be really creative about, and most students will be different, right? What works for one may not work for someone else. And this is like from a coach's perspective or a parent, if you can have the student explain their mnemonics to you, that will help them reinforce it, right? So then it's not just kind of a floating idea in their head. They've now said it out loud, right? And then it becomes a thing. So now into some more kind of, I guess like tangible, physical things we can do as we study. When you review your notes, a lot of students, especially I think my best students and the ones who are the most effortful, put in color coding, right? So for history, maybe you've got purple for people, yellow for events, orange for topics or concepts. Or maybe there's like a green for, hey, I know the teacher is going to test this because they mentioned it over and over. And then for math, same thing, maybe orange for formulas, green for vocab, red for proofs, right? That can just help you. I think color is something that's underrated. It can really help you then think in your head about, okay, this was this part that I studied versus that and that. So it can help you keep those separate. And the bottom bullet on this slide is the most important. But as you review your notes for finals, ask questions, come from a lens of curiosity. What's the topic here? Who are we dealing with? When and where? And then especially why and how. So why did this happen, and why is it important, and how did it affect other things, or how did other things affect it? Right. So again, that way, especially like for history, for example, you can then really see the importance. Why did the teacher emphasize this? How did it impact the rest of history in this country, right, or other countries in the world? And as much as you can force yourself, this is not going to be easy or fun, but writing out the answers, like you're basically doing the test already. And then that will make test day way less burdensome. Right. So like I went to law school many years ago, and a lot of writing on test day in law school. But in general, if you did your work, you kind of already knew what you were going to do. Right. I've already written it out. I just got to come and basically retype it. Right. And so that's true for high school as well. Many juniors in high school work harder than I ever did at law school, right, or anyone did. So this is even more important, right? Trying to make sure you address what's difficult for me, and then writing out in preparation for especially the hardest exams. A big part of executive functioning and test prep is time management. And a lot of us struggle with it. And that relates to planning and prioritization and procrastination. So you got to think, how much time do I have? Not only how many days till the test, but also what leads up to test day. Do I have other tests right before and after? Set up your schedule and plan accordingly, including break time, right? You got to make sure that you've built in break time and study time, and just making sure that it's not all just cramming, the day before the test. That would be inefficient and ineffective. And then as the semester goes on, right, this will be important the week of, but you better make sure the exam, what the format is. For math or science, do I get a calculator? Do I get partial credit? Is it multiple choice? Are there short answers? If there are, do I need a thesis? How many questions? Right. So really knowing what to expect, that's crucial for absolutely any test. For confidence, comfort, momentum, you got to know exactly what's coming. Right. So that's something you can do now. If you haven't already, consult the syllabus, make sure that, ask the teacher if it's not clear, but make sure you know the format of the test. And then study sessions are a mixed bag. But like if you work well in groups and all the students in the group are there for the right reasons, meaning they all just kind of want to succeed, but also put in effort, not just leech off someone else, it can be great. And if you have a few, peers that you really trust, and you guys are kind of near the same level, or even not, if you structure a group session, it'll work, right? Have every student take one topic, research it, present it, right, and give their notes. That saves work for everyone, less of a burden, and it can actually help people. You'll write it out and have to teach it, right? That's the testing part of the GOAT study plan. And then exam week, we'll get into like exam day and testing anxiety and stuff. But for exam week, good sleep. I'm sure people are saying I don't get good sleep. Most of my students do not get good sleep. But that's one thing I assign before every test. Thursday and Friday night before a Saturday test, you better get good sleep. Not just Friday, because you can't say, oh yeah, 9 p.m. I'm going to bed. But if you have your circadian rhythms going the day before, then maybe. Don't skip breakfast, right? Protein, best brain food. My parents always made me eat fish the night before a test. I have no idea if that's still a thing or if it ever was. And then making sure you have laid out what you need, right? So pens, pencils, paper, calculator, notes if it's an open note test. Self-affirmation, but also this is where, as parents or as teachers or mentors, positive affirmation can go a really long way. I see the work you've been doing. I'm proud of you, right? Test scores don't define you. You're really working hard, and I appreciate the effort, right? No matter what, I see that you worked hard. That's huge, right? That would make me want to keep doing that if I heard that from someone who I trust. Good sleep's a big one. Testing anxiety comes up, especially on the standardized tests, but it's a thing for AP exams for sure, and for finals. We're sitting in this environment with all these other people. It feels very like, oh God, I gotta get this score or else. So first, understand everyone feels some level of testing anxiety, and that's important. We actually need it, and some anxiety is a good thing. We call that eustress, EU. stress, good stress. Healthy anxiety says, well, this is something that matters. So I got to prepare, I got to do well. And then there's low anxiety, which is, whatever, I'm fine. I'll wing it on test day. That doesn't often go very well unless, the student's just kind of a prodigy and somehow has it all in their brain. We have some like that, but usually that's not a recipe for success. And then there's also the other end of the spectrum where it's like, oh gosh, I'm going to fail and I'm going to live in my parents' basement my whole life. Oh no, oh no. That's unhealthy anxiety, bad stress that overwhelms us. So realize some anxiety is inevitable, it's necessary, but our job is don't let it overwhelm us. And if you find it doing that, then probably we need to change our preparation method, right? And we'll talk about other ways to tame that inner anxiety beast, but just making sure that you're okay with some anxiety. Everyone has that. Same with like a sporting event or a concert that you're preparing for. You just don't want to let it overwhelm you. So our job, as EF coaches, but also as students, right? Develop this inner coach, right? So my inner coach says, you got this, right? Go in relaxed. You've done your work, knock this out. And then as test day approaches and you're going into test, it's like I'm halfway through. Teacher says 30 minutes left. Got the spike of anxiety. The coach says, you're doing fine, right? We've got 2 questions left. Don't worry about it. Maybe skip this one if you're struggling. Relax, you got this. That type of inner voice is essential. It is so much easier said than done. But if you can develop that inner coach, both in preparation and on test day, it'll make a world of difference. Because otherwise we're letting our inner anxiety monster take over. And that's, that little voice in our head that's kind of saying, you're going to mess this up, right? What if, right? Mom and dad are going to be so disappointed. It's all this kind of negative and spiraling kind of catastrophization. That is like, again, some anxiety is okay, but if you hear it, if you recognize that, your job is get the inner self, and this is now getting into more therapy stuff, but get your inner self to your coach to kind of tame that monster, name it and tame it. Hey, Rupert, no, I'm okay. If I don't get an A on this, it's not the end of the world. Everyone will still like me and love me, right? So name it, and then listen to the coach and not Rupert. Right? So you hear 5 minutes left. Don't think, oh God, oh no, right? You really want that calm presence. I can do this, right? Breathe deep, do your best. That's all we can do. Right? So that comes with practice. It also, like, that's really, again, like I said, where parents and teachers and coaches can help a ton. So that's self-affirmation, right? You're testing yourself, but also just the day of, right? And leading up, you've got this, you can do this, right? That is, I think, something that people don't do enough. As the semester goes, and especially like as it's leading up to tests now, don't be nervous to ask, like, how can I best prepare? When I was a teacher in high school, I liked that. Whenever a student came to ask me a question like that, unless I literally just said it in class, I appreciated that, right? It was always like, yeah, I want to help you because that question alone shows that you care. As a student, you can check with classmates on how they've been successful, or upperclassmen who've taken that class or test. And then just showing up, again, as a teacher, that reflects well, but it can also be helpful review. Study halls, review sessions, office hours, right? Get every bit of intelligence you can to the point where you know exactly what you're going to expect on test day. So like, can I go from one section to another on the SAT? Unless you have extended time, you can't do that. You can't spend longer than you would. What type of information and how much do I have to know? I think linking ideas is crucial, but the question would be on this test, do I need to know broader connections between topics, or are they kind of in isolation? Can I just know them individually without connection? Partial credit, how do I score it? And then also, what percent is this worth to my grade? Knowing what I have to get an A, right? So that goes into setting goals and also just knowing what to expect. So last kind of home stretch here is just, what do we do like leading up to test day and on test day itself? For studying, highly recommend this for all like schoolwork, but the 50-10 rule, 50 minutes of studying, 10 minutes off. The reason that works well is because it's not too long of a block. 2 hours is too long to just sit there doing something. And it's also not too long of a break. Make sure with your 10 minutes of non-studying, you're not just going into like your well-worn paths of distraction, Instagram or whatever it is these days, Snapchat, or just going online, right, or texting. If you can take that 10 minutes and use it to get a snack, take a short walk, just sit outside for a second, even looking at nature can help restore and replenish just brain stores. So putting away distractions, technology, mostly the phone. And like I said, most of us are not multitaskers. So you're better off either doing instrumental music, which never worked for me, or none at all. Right? Set yourself up for success with your studying environment. And then just physically, what are we going to do? So first plan of attack to study for a final exam is usually review your notes. Things that you have written that the teacher has imparted as important and things we need to know. Refresh your memory based on things that you've already done, your notes. Second, if you have a study guide, review it. Figure out what you don't know. That goes into like what's on the test, right? So syllabus, study guide, making sure that if the teacher gives it to you, they're doing it for a reason. And then there's often like a textbook, right? So the third step is review the text. Don't try to read it all, right? That's what people do like the night before the test. They're like, I'm just going to read this whole book. That's not going to work, right? That working memory won't allow us to hold it all in. So visual information can be great. Maps, graphs, figures. Again, writing down things as you see them, if you're like, I need to remember this. And then if there are initial review topics in your notes, you're like, man, I was weak on that. Focus in on those, right? Make a little list. Be organized, plan ahead. And these 3 steps are simple and apply to almost every class. And then as you're going through the textbook, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I know this. I knew it in my notes. I know it now. Move on. That's great. Make sure you're not doing extraneous stuff. So if the study guide, focuses on a few things, that's what you should focus on. If it's a final with short answers, written responses, think about topics the teacher keeps emphasizing, right? That's probably what they're going to ask you about. So like, what have they covered over and over? That's a pretty strong clue that it'll be on the final. And then review your notes again. Your notes are so important, right? That's why it's good to take notes as you go throughout the year. Look for topics you need more guidance on or material for, and then refer back to the text as needed. Right? So remember, it's okay to go through something and be like, I don't get this, or it's not the most comfortable. Highlight it and figure out how can you make it more comfortable. Don't just give up on that part. And again, I've said this a few times, but just because I think it's so crucial and not easy to do, but force yourself to write things down. The number one takeaway is to study, learn something, write it down for yourself. That's how you do the testing or the teaching part. If you need a partner and that's helpful, great, but just make sure they're on the same page as you. It's not a distraction, but rather helpful. And then finally, let's just talk test day strategies. I'll open it up for some questions if you have them. Making sure we know what we have, making sure we have what we need for the exam, right? That's obvious, but that comes into organization, right? Your backpack should be free of clutter, know what is allowed. If it's an open note test, you better bring some good notes, your notes. And if it's a digital or virtual test, make sure it's clear what you can and can't bring. Are they going to provide the scratch paper? Probably. Do I need to provide it or bring it? And then calculator allowed and so on. So just basic, know what you need. Eat right, sleep right. And again, a lot of my students will scoff because they don't do that normally. But I mean, sleep especially really affects performance, right? Every one of us has been probably even, this week had a night of sleep where it's like not enough. And then the whole next day is affected, right? Everything's just a little bit more annoying or more difficult. Testing burns calories. If you find yourself like you work for a couple hours and you realize, dang, I'm hungry. It's because we're burning calories. You need energy stores. And having the right energy via sleep and food impacts our processing ability. So again, protein-filled breakfast, especially if you usually do that, don't skip breakfast. And again, these rhythms and like the day or night before the test isn't enough. Monday night sleep will affect Wednesday morning's test. So I always tell people get 2 good nights sleep before a big test. So a few tips for the next, I guess, few months, more like a couple months, few weeks. Study sessions individually, but also with groups. Second, I would say build checkpoints into your schedule. This comes into planning. Just a quick check-in. Is my plan working? Because I set this up as, I'm going to do my notes and then I'm going to do the study session and then the text. If there's part of this that isn't working, recalibrate and don't worry. Be gentle with yourself. If things aren't working, you can be like, oh gosh, like I'm getting worse and I'm working harder, but it's not turning out effectively. Can't spiral, can't think, oh gosh, I'm screwing up. Instead, you just got to kind of gently say, all right, what's not working? What might work? Let me try that. It's a process, right? Just like finding the right medications is a process, right? You can't get it right always the first time, especially if it's a struggle. And so I think that gentleness as you prepare for these finals, but also down the road, remember that it's all a process. We're all kind of gonna learn a lot about ourselves as we go, and it's never going to be perfect, especially not right away. So in review, we want to be proactive, always proactive, not reactive. That comes into planning and scheduling ahead of time. Keep the GOAT plan in mind when studying, right? Goals, organization, attention, and testing. As you study, learn which methods are effective. Are mnemonic devices good for you, right? Are you more a person that needs to write things out? Are you visual? Do you need to speak it out loud or some combination, right? Learn what works for you and what doesn't. Seek the support you need during exam week, or if you're a parent, give the support your student needs during exam week, right? Mostly just they know it's important. So your job is not to kind of harp, but more uh, making sure they're putting in the effort and doing everything on your end to help, setting them up for good food, good sleep, all that. We need to acknowledge how testing anxiety can affect performance. A little bit of stress is good, but can't be overwhelmed. And throughout all of this, we're trying to just create this positive outlook, right? Very, very important to think about not what has gone wrong in the past or what could go wrong, but the things you do well, what you succeed at and have succeeded at, and how you can use those for this particular test. That's all I've got for you. And we're going to launch another just little poll. And I'm going to open it up for Q&A. If you are satisfied, if you don't have questions, I hope that you got what you needed from this. And please feel free to reach out to the emails or number below with questions. And feel free to call it an evening. But if anyone does have questions, let's open it up. And we've got plenty of time to answer those. You're very welcome. Thanks for joining. No questions yet, but I'm gonna leave it open just for a few more minutes. You should see a poll, like I said, pop up in a moment here, just a second one. EC group. I'm gonna leave it open for just 2 more minutes to see if anything comes in. Yep, and only question I've got is will we share the slides? The answer is yes. They generally get shared on the Friday after a presentation. So if you've registered for this, you will receive the slides. And another question, which actually is an interesting one. This question is, would I recommend videos as a good alternative for studying? If you're a visual person, there are certain videos that are really good, like Khan Academy, for example, has videos on a variety of topics. I have had students who do better with it. I would say if you're going to be watching videos, probably the best way to learn from that is to be writing it down as you go, right? So then I'm hearing it, I'm writing it. That to me seems like a very, very good way for a vast majority of students to learn and retain information. So yeah, I mean, especially if there's relevant and good videos on topic, I think it's a great way to study. All right. Thank you guys for joining. Good luck with finals. And again, reach out to the email or number below with anything that comes up. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.